The story begins with a claim so explosive that it immediately raises one question above all others. What would happen if jewelry associated with Princess Diana suddenly appeared on the market and royal family members discovered it? That is the dramatic premise surrounding today's story, centered on Prince William, Camilla's daughter Laura Lopez, and one of the most emotionally charged subjects in modern royal history, Diana's jewelry. According to the reported scenario behind this story, William is said to have been stunned after becoming aware of an alleged attempt to sell jewelry described as belonging to Diana. The claim has generated obvious curiosity because Diana's personal possessions are not ordinary pieces of jewelry. To millions of people around the world, they represent memory, history, family, and one of the most recognizable chapters of the British monarchy. And that is precisely why the allegation is so sensitive. The central claim is not simply about the value of a necklace, bracelet, ring, or pair of earrings. It is about what happens when an object connected to Diana becomes part of a story involving another branch of the royal family. But before we go any further, there is an important distinction at the heart of this story. The dramatic allegation surrounding a sale is the premise being discussed here, not an established royal announcement or confirmed palace statement. There has been no factual foundation provided for treating a private confrontation, a specific sale, or William's personal reaction as confirmed events. So the real story is the question: why would an allegation like this create such a powerful reaction? Why does Diana's jewelry carry so much emotional weight? And why would the involvement of Camilla's daughter make the situation even more complicated for royal watchers? To understand that, we have to go back to the meaning attached to Diana's possessions in the first place. Princess Diana remains one of the most recognizable figures ever connected with the British monarchy. Her style became legendary, her public appearances were studied around the world, and particular pieces of jewelry became inseparable from the image she created during her years as a working royal. Some of those pieces were valuable because of the stones, craftsmanship, or royal provenance, but their emotional value was something else entirely. For Diana's sons, William and Harry, anything genuinely connected to their mother could carry a significance that could never be measured by a price tag. That distinction matters. A piece of jewelry can be worth thousands or even millions of pounds on the open market, yet to a family member, the same object could represent a parent, a childhood memory, a photograph seen millions of times, or a moment from a life that can never be repeated. And this is where the story becomes much bigger than jewelry. It becomes a question about legacy. When people hear the phrase Diana's jewelry, many immediately picture the famous pieces associated with her public life. Some have remained connected to the royal family through later generations, while other items have had different histories and ownership arrangements. That means not every piece described as Diana's automatically has the same ownership history. This is a crucial point because the emotional language surrounding royal possessions can sometimes become much stronger than the underlying facts. A piece may have been worn by Diana without necessarily being her personal property. A piece may have been connected to the royal collection rather than being a private possession. And an item described online as Diana's may require considerably more evidence before anyone can establish exactly where it came from. So when a claim emerges suggesting that one of Diana's pieces is being sold, the first question should not be, how angry was William? The first question should be, was the item actually Diana's, and who legally owned it? That question changes everything. Because if an item genuinely belonged to Diana and later inherited, gifted, transferred, or otherwise legally passed to another person, the circumstances of any potential sale would depend on that history. And if the item was never personally owned by Diana in the first place, the entire allegation could take on a very different meaning. Yet the emotional reaction among royal watchers is understandable. Diana's story created a permanent sense of unfinished history. For her sons, the loss was personal. For the public, it became cultural. Her photographs remained everywhere. Her fashion continued to influence generations. Her sons grew older under extraordinary public scrutiny while carrying a connection to a mother who had become an international icon. That is why objects associated with Diana often attract unusual attention. A photograph can become historic, a dress can become an exhibition piece, and a necklace can become a symbol. Now, place that symbolism inside the modern royal family. William is not simply Diana's eldest son, he is also the heir to the throne, and one of the most visible representatives of the monarchy. That means his relationship with his mother's legacy is constantly observed through a different lens. Every public appearance, every family connection, and every item associated with Diana can attract speculation about how the next generation of the monarchy understands her memory. And then there is Laura Lopez. Laura is the daughter of Queen Camilla, and therefore part of the extended royal family through her mother's marriage to King Charles. That family connection is what makes the premise of this story so provocative. The allegation does not involve a random member of the public. It places a member of Camilla's family in a story involving something supposedly connected to Diana. For royal watchers familiar with the history surrounding Charles, Camilla, and Diana, that combination immediately creates emotional tension. But emotional tension should not be confused with evidence. There is no basis in the information provided here to claim that Laura Lopez actually sold Diana's jewelry, that she possessed a particular item belonging to Diana, or that William personally caught her doing so. Those are the elements of the dramatic premise, and that distinction is essential. Still, the reason the story resonates is easy to understand. Diana's story has always been intertwined with the complicated history of Charles and Camilla. Even decades later, public discussions surrounding the three figures can become intensely emotional. For many people, Diana represents one chapter of royal history, while Camilla represents another. Today, Camilla is queen, William is heir to the throne, and Diana's sons have built their adult lives under the enormous shadow of their mother's legacy. That makes any allegation involving Diana's belongings particularly powerful. But what if the object itself became the missing piece of the puzzle? Imagine that a piece of jewelry appeared in a sale environment with a description suggesting a royal connection. Immediately, questions would follow. Where did it come from? Who owned it? When was it transferred? Was there documentation? Was it actually Diana's personal property? Was the royal provenance verified? And perhaps most importantly, who had the authority to sell it? These are the questions that would matter far more than a dramatic headline, because provenance is everything when dealing with historically significant royal objects. Without reliable documentation, a claim about an item's history can remain just that, a claim. And that is why the reported premise surrounding this story requires careful consideration. The title suggests a dramatic moment in which William discovers something and reacts with shock, but there is no confirmed account provided here establishing that such a confrontation took place. There is no confirmed statement describing William's reaction. There is no verified royal announcement confirming that Laura Lopez attempted to sell a particular piece of Diana's jewelry. So rather than inventing a private conversation or putting words into William's mouth, the more interesting question is what such a discovery would mean if a genuine ownership dispute ever emerged. And this is where the story becomes fascinating. Because royal families have always had to deal with the difference between private family possessions and objects that become public symbols. The British monarchy operates on a scale where ordinary family decisions can become matters of public fascination. A private wedding gift can suddenly appear in photographs, a family heirloom can become recognizable around the world, and a piece of clothing can become associated with an entire historical era. And now place that symbolism inside the modern royal family. William is not simply Diana's eldest son, he is also the heir to the throne and one of the most visible representatives of the monarchy. That means his relationship with his mother's legacy is constantly observed through a different lens. Every public appearance, every family connection, and every item associated with Diana can attract speculation about how the next generation of the monarchy understands her memory.
And then there is Laura Lopez. Laura is the daughter of Queen Camilla, and therefore part of the extended royal family through her mother's marriage to King Charles. That family connection is what makes the premise of this story so provocative. The allegation does not involve a random member of the public. It places a member of Camilla's family in a story involving something supposedly connected to Diana. For royal watchers familiar with the history surrounding Charles, Camilla, and Diana, that combination immediately creates emotional tension. But emotional tension should not be confused with evidence. There is no basis in the information provided here to claim that Laura Lopez actually sold Diana's jewelry, that she possessed a particular item belonging to Diana, or that William personally caught her doing so. Those are the elements of the dramatic premise, and that distinction is essential.
For families, however, selling a sentimental object can sometimes feel very different. A family heirloom may have financial value, but its emotional value can be impossible to replace. And for Diana's family, that emotional dimension is especially powerful. William and Harry lost their mother when they were still young. The public watched their grief. The world watched them walk behind her coffin. And decades later, the memory of that moment remains deeply embedded in the public imagination. So imagine the reaction if an object genuinely connected to Diana were suddenly treated as an ordinary commercial item. Even without any confirmed confrontation, it is easy to understand why royal watchers would ask whether the family should have been informed. But again, that is a hypothetical question, not a confirmed description of what happened. The distinction matters because royal stories often grow rapidly once social media becomes involved. One dramatic claim can be repeated across multiple accounts. A headline can become a video title. A video title can become a social media post. And eventually, repetition itself can make an allegation appear more established than the evidence actually shows. That is especially dangerous with stories involving private family relationships. The public may know the major historical events, but they do not automatically know what happens behind closed doors. There is a temptation to fill those gaps with dramatic conversations, to imagine William confronting someone, to imagine a furious royal response, to imagine palace officials rushing to intervene. But without evidence, those scenes remain speculation, and the strongest storytelling does not need to invent them because the real historical context is already dramatic enough. Diana's legacy has survived enormous changes within the monarchy. Charles became king, Camilla became queen, William became heir. A new generation of royals entered public life, yet Diana remains part of the story. Her sons carry her memory, her style continues to influence fashion, her public image remains recognizable, and objects associated with her still command attention. That is why the idea of Diana's jewelry being sold can produce such an immediate emotional reaction. It touches something deeper than money. It touches memory. It touches ownership, and it touches the question of who gets to preserve a person's legacy after they are gone. Now consider the specific family connection at the center of the allegation. Laura Lopez is not a senior working royal in the same sense as William. She does not occupy the constitutional position that William does. That distinction is important because being related to the monarch does not automatically mean that every personal decision becomes an official royal matter. Members of the wider royal family can have private lives and personal property. So even if an individual associated with the royal family were to sell a personally owned object, that would not automatically mean the monarchy itself had approved or ordered the sale. This is precisely why the ownership question is so important. If a piece was legally and personally owned, its disposition could be fundamentally different from an object held as part of a royal collection. And if the object was not actually Diana's, then describing it as Diana's jewelry could itself create confusion. The more you examine the story, the more the sensational headline gives way to a much more complicated set of questions. What happened to Diana's possessions after her death? Which pieces went to her sons?
which items remained with the wider family, which objects were privately owned, which were part of larger collections, and which pieces have simply become associated with Diana because she was photographed wearing them. Those questions matter because history is rarely as simple as a headline. And that brings us back to William. If William were genuinely confronted with evidence that a treasured possession of his mother's was being sold without his knowledge, the significance would extend far beyond the monetary value of the item. It would potentially raise questions about family trust. It could raise questions about provenance. It could raise questions about whether an important part of Diana's legacy was being handled appropriately. But again, there is no confirmed evidence in the supplied information that William actually experienced such a moment. The claim remains the dramatic center of the story, and perhaps the most revealing part is the reaction of the public itself. Why are people so fascinated by this? Because Diana's story never really ended. Her life ended tragically, but the public conversation surrounding her continued. Every generation discovers her story in a slightly different way. Older viewers remember the events as they happened. Younger viewers know her through photographs, documentaries, books, fashion exhibitions, and the stories told by her sons. And objects provide a physical connection to that history. A necklace can be held, a ring can be photographed, a dress can be displayed. A personal belonging can turn an abstract historical figure into someone who feels almost present. That emotional connection explains why rumors involving Diana's possessions can travel so quickly. People are not simply reacting to jewelry, they are reacting to what the jewelry represents. And this is where Camilla's involvement becomes particularly sensitive. For years, Charles, Camilla, and Diana have existed inside one of the most discussed personal stories in modern royal history. That history has been revisited countless times. Books have been published, interviews have been analyzed, television programs have revisited the timeline, and public attitudes have evolved. Yet the emotional associations remain. Camilla's position has changed dramatically. She is now queen. Charles is king. William stands next in line to the throne.
The institution has moved forward, but Diana's memory remains part of the monarchy's modern identity. That creates a strange historical situation. The woman who once represented one of the monarchy's most complicated chapters is now the mother of the future king. Her legacy cannot simply be separated from the institution, it is woven into it. That is why an allegation involving Diana's jewelry and Camilla's family creates such an immediate reaction. It combines two emotional histories that many royal watchers still view through very different lenses. But there is another side to the story. Perhaps the most important lesson is that an emotionally powerful claim still requires evidence. If a particular piece of jewelry was genuinely being offered for sale, the provenance would need to be examined. If the item were genuinely Diana's, documentation would matter. If ownership were disputed, records would matter. If William had actually reacted publicly, there would need to be a reliable source. Without those things, the dramatic elements remain allegations rather than established facts. And that may be the biggest mystery of all, because the headline promises a shocking royal confrontation, but the real question is whether the underlying evidence can support that confrontation. What happened next in a genuine case involving Diana's possessions would depend entirely on the facts surrounding the object. Where did it come from? Who owned it? How did it leave their possession? Was it transferred legally? Was its history documented? And was the connection to Diana authentic? Those questions could transform the entire story. If the provenance were genuine, the story would become a serious discussion about the preservation of a royal legacy. If the provenance were questionable, the controversy could become a case study in how quickly royal rumors can grow. And if the object turned out not to have belonged to Diana at all, the dramatic premise would collapse under closer examination. That is why the jewelry itself is almost a character in this story.
It sits at the center of everything. It connects Diana to her family, it connects the past to the present, and it creates a bridge between private memory and public fascination. For William, the emotional significance of his mother's possessions can be understood without inventing a private confrontation. For Lara Lopez, the fact that she is Camilla's daughter explains why her name would attract immediate attention in any story involving Diana. But neither relationship by itself proves that the alleged sale happened, and that distinction is one royal watchers should keep in mind, because the monarchy has always existed in the space between public duty and private life. The public sees the ceremonies, the photographs, the speeches, the weddings, the funerals, the crowns, but behind those images are families dealing with inheritance, memories, personal belongings, and complicated relationships just like other families do. The difference is that their private decisions can become global headlines, and Diana's possessions sit at an especially sensitive intersection between those two worlds. They are personal objects, but they are also historical artifacts in the eyes of the public. That contradiction makes every story about them unusually powerful. And perhaps that is why the allegation involving William has captured so much attention. The image of a future king discovering that an object associated with his mother is being sold is emotionally irresistible. But the real story is more nuanced. The most important revelation is not necessarily what William supposedly said. It is whether the object was truly Diana's, whether it was legitimately owned, whether the reported sale actually occurred, and whether the story can be supported by evidence rather than repetition. Because when it comes to Diana, emotion can easily outrun documentation. Her memory is so powerful that even an uncertain claim can feel convincing. But history deserves more than a compelling headline. It deserves facts. It deserves provenance, and it deserves a clear distinction between what is known, what is reported, and what remains speculation. That does not make the story less fascinating. In many ways, it makes it more fascinating, because now the mystery is no longer simply about a piece of jewelry. It is about the journey of Diana's legacy through a family that has changed almost beyond recognition since her death. Charles became king, Camilla became queen, William moved closer to the throne, and Diana's memory continued to shape the story of the next generation. So, if an object truly connected to Diana were ever placed on the market, the question would not simply be how much someone was willing to pay. The deeper question would be what that object meant to the people who knew her. Was it merely jewelry? Was it an heirloom? Was it part of a collection? Was it a personal memory? Or had it become something larger, a physical piece of history? And perhaps that is the question that makes this entire controversy so compelling, because Diana's jewelry was never just about diamonds, pearls, or precious metals. It became part of the visual language of her life, and after her death, those objects became part of the visual language of her legacy. That legacy now belongs to a new generation. William carries the family history forward, his children represent the future, and Diana remains a powerful presence in the story of both. So, while the dramatic claim at the center of this story suggests a shocking confrontation between William and Camilla's daughter, the information available here does not establish that such a confrontation actually occurred. What it does reveal is why such a claim would have extraordinary emotional power. It combines Diana's enduring legacy, William's position as her eldest son, Camilla's family connection, and the extraordinary public fascination with royal possessions. And that combination is enough to ignite a storm of questions. If genuine evidence ever emerged showing that a piece unquestionably belonging to Diana had been sold without the knowledge of those who inherited it, the story could become far more significant. But until that evidence exists, the mystery remains exactly that, a mystery. And perhaps there is one final question worth asking. If Diana's most treasured possessions could speak, what would they tell us about the people who inherited them, the people who preserved them, and the people who wanted a piece of her history? Because decades after her death, the world is still looking at the objects she left behind and asking the same fundamental question: who gets to decide what happens to a legacy? And when that legacy belongs to Princess Diana, even the smallest piece of jewelry can suddenly become much bigger than itself. It can become a symbol of family, a symbol of memory, and, perhaps most importantly, a reminder that some chapters of royal history never truly disappear. They simply wait for the next piece of evidence to bring them back into the spotlight.